Welcome, everyone, to today's roundtable on philanthropy supporting Ukraine. In partnership with Philanthropic Foundations Canada, the Mott Foundation, and Community Foundations of Canada, we welcome you to today's conversation on supporting media coverage in Ukraine. A few call reminders before we dive in. We encourage you to rename yourself in the participant list. If you hover your mouse over your name and click rename, you will be able to adjust that. There is automated live transcript available. If you select at the bottom of your Zoom screen, show captions or view live transcript. If you have any technical difficulties, please reach out to any of the council staff during the call and we will assist you. The conversation is being recorded and will be shared afterwards with all registrants alongside resources and key takeaways. Please feel free to share this far and wide across your networks. Lastly, this is a conversation, so we encourage you to engage by asking questions, providing comments and feedback, utilizing the Zoom chat feature, and engaging in today's conversation. Welcome again. We are so grateful that you've joined us for today's conversation. Now I will pass to Natalie Ross for some opening remarks.
Great. Hello, everyone. It's lovely to see those who are able to join us live, and thank you to those who can't be with us here but are planning to watch this recording afterwards. And thank you very much to our speakers and our partners for this event. Today's event is part of an ongoing response focused with how philanthropy can support the ongoing and widespread recovery, relief, and rebuilding efforts as a result of Russia's war on Ukraine. Since March 2022, we've hosted these partnered events and provided resources for funders to guide your ongoing response. We're committed to providing these responsive conversations for our members and have additional events planned for the future. So please reach out to myself or to Melissa or here in the chat today or on email if there are other discussion topics you'd like us to cover in this series of events. So as we join the conversation today, which is an important look at media and what that means in Ukraine, we really invite you to be a part of this conversation. So post questions, raise your hand. Let us know what you'd like to hear from the speakers. The knowledge that's shared today will deepen our understanding of the vital role media plays in shaping informed, engaged, and empowered communities, yes, in Ukraine, but also for work that many of us do around the world in other regions. Our hope is that from today's conversation, you're all encouraged to contribute meaningfully to global causes that we support around the world. So we extend our gratitude to the Mott Foundation for continuing to support the Council's work on philanthropy's response to Ukraine, and our Canadian partners, Philanthropic Foundations of Canada and Community Foundations of Canada. So at this time, I hand it over to our moderator, Adrian Kamarzin, to kick us off. Thanks, Adrian.
Hello, Natalie. Thank you very much. Thank you, Melissa. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. My name's Adrian Karmazin, and we have a great lineup of speakers for you today. We have Daryna Shevchenko, a Deputy Minister of Culture and Information Policy in Ukraine. And also Taras has been, prior to his government job, he's been involved in civil society in supporting democracy, rule of law reforms in Ukraine for many years. We also have Marta Dechok, a professor of history and political science at Western University in Ontario, Canada. And Marta's been following media in Ukraine for many years and actually was recently back from Ukraine, where she'd been conducting additional research on the current situation with the media environment in Ukraine. And we have Daryna Shevchenko, the CEO of the Kyiv Independent. That's Ukraine's most important, prominent, if you will, popular English language publication, which just recently actually celebrated its second anniversary since its birth. Just was founded, basically established just a few months before the war began. Because I'd like to start us off basically by just talking a bit about the damage that's been inflicted on Ukraine's media environment by Russia's invasion. There's the physical damage of editorial offices, studios, things like that. You know, so many people, including journalists, being displaced. So Taras, perhaps you can tell us, you know, give us a picture of what it looks like and what it all means.
Yes, of course. Hi, everyone. As to damages, and actually, my role at the ministry has several subcategories, and just recently, I'm also in charge, just like maybe for last month and a half, for the recovery issues. And right now, we're in the process of calculating more precisely, together with UNESCO, all the damages and losses that both our areas, I mean, culture, including heritage, and media occurred. And actually, with media, it's much harder to calculate damages, because in most cases it's rather about replacement of media or like loses their offices, while in culture we are calculating first of all physical damages to cultural institutions or to heritage sites. And we have in our list 1,700 of cultural institutions that were damaged, and 800 of the national heritage sites that were damaged in Ukraine during these less than 2 years. And together, right now, Ukraine is in the process of RDNA 3, which is rapid damage assessment. And this process is done together with the World Bank. The World Bank is actually an organization that's afterwards will issue the big report. The previous report, RDNA 2, did not include any media damages as a market. And we work now with UNESCO to have the media calculations, which are much harder to calculate, as I mentioned, to have it included as well, because media is also important. We have concrete cases, in many cases, when it's the transmission infrastructure, it rather goes with our friends Ministry of Digital Transformation. Suspilne, public stereo broadcaster, they lost some of the offices on temporary occupied territories, or the damages in Kherson that was liberated 1 year ago. With replacements also, many media had to move, first even from Kiev, but then coming back, but definitely for those places that are very dangerous to live now. And with physical damages, unfortunately, dozens of journalists killed, and that's include both being killed while performing the duty and journalists who went on the front line to serve in the army. And we calculate these other damages to our media society as well. So maybe to be too long, I'll stop here and hope there'll be more opportunity to talk.
Sure. Perhaps I'd turn to Daryna Shevchenko now. Daryna, perhaps you could fill in the picture a little bit in terms of what the war has meant for your team of journalists in terms of you know, the trauma that they've witnessed, and you know, how it's impacted them, and the difficulties of working in that war situation, which I guess would be multiplied all across the board in Ukraine, but your organization is an example of that.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to talk to you. And I'm really sorry that it's about the unfortunate things. But thank you for the opportunity to share, because it's important to talk about it. One thing I would want to add is that, so there are a lot of, except for being the CEO for the Kyiv Independent, which is a media in the English language, informing the foreign audiences about what's happening in Ukraine. I've also been a media consultant for quite a few years now, and working with different Ukrainian media, local and hyper-local as well. And from our clients, I know that many of them have, you know, went through the loss of their offices or the damage of their offices, that they had to relocate their staff and their families from the danger zones, and then come back, but still, you know, coming back and forth, trying to report on the areas where they cover for their communities. So a lot has been happening. As for my own team, the Kyiv Independence, so we were set up just 3 months before the full-scale invasion started. I don't know if many of you know the story, but we were set up after the owner of the previous English language publication of Ukraine, Kyiv Post, closed down the paper and fired the whole editorial team, and then we set up the Kyiv Independent. And well, to say the least, we weren't prepared, right? So we weren't really an institution back then. We didn't have any production equipment, barely any bulletproof vests. So we tried as hard as possible to get all of that very quickly. We didn't have any capacity in the beginning to relocate our, staff in an organized way. So what we did is we essentially asked people to let us know if they have a plan or they don't have a plan to relocate and take their families to safety. And that's how it worked with us. But a few of our journalists still stayed in Kyiv through the whole attack on Kyiv, trying to cover everything that was happening back then. And many did leave through some actual trauma, witnessing death and destruction. But the important point I want to make is that it's not just the frontline reporters who are living through trauma that are affected by the war. It's the whole sector of media professionals, both managers and news editors, who are living through that trauma. It's often a secondhand trauma when they spend literally all the time reporting on the horrible things that are happening, watching the videos, writing the news items, even if they're doing it from the comfort of their seat at home or in the office. It is still very traumatizing. And to me, for a while, I think over a year, a lot of media professionals, and they know it not just from my team, but also from my colleagues, were running on, adrenaline, essentially. We recorded approximately 10 days off for the team of 40 people during the 2022 in total. So nobody wanted to take time off. Everybody wanted to work. But then the stress and the fatigue sort of accumulated, and we started feeling it somewhere in the middle of 2023. And we started, trying to figure out how to tackle that problem. So we launched a mental support program for our staff that includes a lot of things, and we also did a lot of research on how to support the people. And I think the important thing I want to say is that there are a lot of opportunities offering mostly the same things, but not really covering the needs. So what mostly is offered on the market is retreats and group therapy. Sometimes some lectures on how to help yourself in some situation. But that is not often applicable. So very often Ukrainian media are understaffed, and it's very hard to get a team and, send everybody on the retreat, because then the media stops and there is, no one to do the work instead of you. So people usually end up going to the retreat and walking from Carpathian Mountain somewhere, which is still working. And then group therapies are mostly for the people with the same very similar experiences. That is not often the case inside even one newsroom, because people get different experiences reporting on very different issues and need definitely different groups to go through therapy if in the group. So we ended up looking for support for individual therapy for most of our staff. And we found such a program, thankfully. But we did organize a retreat at the end. We tried to, manage it as well as possible. But what's also important is that a lot of mental support starts with the institution and how predictable the work is for people, the financial situation, the evaluation system, all that kind of stuff, the feedback. And that is a problem, because a lot of media in Ukraine did lose their financial revenue streams kind of overnight with advertising market dying. And then there is donor support, but a lot of donor support is focused on programmatic support, not institutional, and that very much limits how media can support themselves for the basic things. But the management effort that is very much needed to support the journalists mentally while they're in a very turbulent situation they're reporting on. I think that's just the general overview on how it's happening for us.
Great. Thank you for that, Daryna. I'd like to turn now to Marta Dachok. I know you visited Ukraine recently, what did you observe? What were your impressions about how the media is operating in Ukraine? Perhaps any challenges, perhaps specific accomplishments that you think are worth noting?
Thank you. Before I answer that, if I could just add to what Taras and Daryna said about destruction. I think it's really important for us to remember that Russia has deliberately targeted communications infrastructure. So they have made it one of their goals to impede communications and media. They blew up the transmission tower back in like early March of 2022. And for various parts of this protracted, escalated war, various parts of the country, people have been cut off from major media information because of the deliberate destruction by Russia. But the other thing that's really impressive is the resilience and how Ukrainian media outlets have worked extremely hard to continue providing information to society. And something that was not in that list of questions, so I'm just going to put it on the agenda, is the role of radio suddenly resurfaced in a way that surprised me and I think many people. Because in the early phases of the war, when communications were down and sometimes there was no internet, radio frequencies, the airways, they continued to work. And so people pulled out their old radios, and that's how they received a lot of information in areas at times when the usual communications are down. Something else that I think many people have noticed is the role of social media in this information situation, information war. And that's the focus of my new research project, is how social media has changed in these conditions. And something, I mean, I read Kyiv Independent every day, but I read it through my Twitter feed. I don't actually, so it's what has happened is this convergence of different forms of media. So there's the old separation of, traditional professional media and social media has blended, and the platforms interact. So again, I listen to Hromadske Radio. Again, I see what they're posting on their Facebook feed or their Twitter feed, and then I go and check out their. So there's a lot of flexibility and change happening in the overall media environment. The thing that I find quite concerning is the role of media platforms like Telegram, which you guys know, the people from Ukraine, that is the most popular social media platform. And a lot of the social media Telegram accounts that are the most popular are anonymous accounts. People like me, I go to Kyiv Independent and Hromadske Radio and Suspilne, legitimate sources of information. But there are all of these channels that are anonymous, so nobody really knows who is providing that information. And that's where people are going to get a lot of their information. And I think Daryna and Taras can speak to this a lot more, because challenging disinformation and fake information is a huge part of this whole story of media and information, and where people get their information, why they choose the sources they do, and what impact that has. And there have been a number of cases recently that apparently Zelensky says this or Zaluzhny says that, but this is all unverified information. And yet that is feeding the information cycle in society, which it's not just Ukraine. This is happening in Canada. This is happening in the States. It's a global phenomenon. But in conditions of war, it's quite concerning.
Thank you, Marta. That's a very important point you made about disinformation, and I'm sure that'll fit well into the kind of the next area that I wanted us to focus on, which was on the role of media and journalists in Ukraine during wartime. Obviously, there's the traditional role of journalists in a society, supporting democracy, challenging authority, or at least keeping an eye on what our political leaders are doing and that type of thing. But obviously, with the war, there's so much more. And I'm thinking particularly how journalists now are playing a role in recording, chronicling Russian war crimes in Ukraine for possible use in future criminal proceedings. So I wonder, I know, for example, there's a project called the Reckoning Project. I know Natalia Homeniuk, who participates in that, was just in Washington presenting some of their work. It was very, very interesting and important. So perhaps I'll turn first to Taras. Can you tell us a little bit from your perspective about, sort of the unique challenges and unique activities of journalists, the critical role they're playing now during the war, be it, chronicling war crimes, dealing with misinformation, disinformation, and that type of thing.
Thanks. Yeah, I actually wanted to start to follow what Marta Dishok said about disinformation and the fake news, and to give my point of view on that. We shouldn't just measure the problem with disinformation by facts when fake news were released. That's unfortunately the reality, that there should be some fakes today, tomorrow, and later on. We should measure by the damage that whether it was caused or not. And if I make a comparison, you can walk somewhere and I can have dirty shoes afterwards, but if you can come home, just wash your shoes. You just have the previous status as before. So if someone disseminated the fake interview of Zaluzhny and later it was clear that it is fake, it's not really a matter. But if you are walking on this dirt, you slip and you broke your leg, that's actually the damage. And what's the broken leg in the disinformation area? That's the resilience of Ukrainians. That's the trust. That's the possible disorder or public disobedience that Russia would like to have in Ukraine. I'm pretty sure it's not really happening. It's maybe more successful in some other countries that are shifting support or dissupport of Ukraine, that are voting in favor of like pro-Ukrainian party or pro-Russian party. And we see cases in the world when in general the level of support is very high, but in some societies it's going down. And again, it doesn't mean that the only reason was the dirt and sleeping in the dirt. There are many reasons why some political parties in some societies are losing their sympathies and why others are receiving the sympathies. But we cannot just measure on the number of disinformation cases. Even before the war, when we were starting the Center of Strategic Communication, the agency within our ministry to deal with disinformation, we were saying that the previous methods of just recording fake news and making registries of fake news, they don't really help. And the initial work that fact checkers organizations were doing was good as a first steps, but not really not really enough and on the high level. So, and Adrian asked you a question about the journalist work. I think it's amazing. I think that journalists and other groups of people, they, being Ukrainians and being at war, they understand that we, all of us, need to do our duties in the best way possible, despite any troubles, despite difficulties. That's our civic obligation, and journalists are really excellent in performing their duties and obligations.
Really, truly, yes. reporting.
And just one more thing, it's also the war and crisis, it's also about opportunity and using of this opportunity. Daryna Shevchenko, who represents the media that was just created few months before war and with unclear perspectives, but now it's I think much more trusted, reliable, and popular than the media for which these people worked before. Probably the biggest opportunity was, or one of the biggest, that was politically used. That's on the fourth day of the, it's more political level, but on the fourth day of invasion, when all the media were saying that Kiev will be captured in few days, the President Zelensky signed a petition to apply for the membership of the European Union. Yeah, and now we already have candidate status, and we are at the stage of opening negotiations. Again, one more of my roles is European integration, so it's very important for me as a person at the ministry, but as a citizen as well. So using these opportunities, I think, was also very good for Suspilne, public service broadcaster, that a lot of media organizations and development partners support. And European Union is extremely happy how it's developing. So they really use the opportunity to spread and develop their Telegram channels and digital platforms. And having the Telegram channels in many oblasts as a source number one, like in Sumy or in Chernihiv, having more than 100,000 subscribers, and having Suspilne as a very reliable brand and source of information. Contrast to those anonymous channels that Marta Dechok was referring to. Thank you.
Thank you, Taras. Daryna, tell us a little bit about how the Kiev Independent is surviving. How do you guys do it with, I'm sure the advertising market is not very strong in Ukraine right now. How are you managing? How are other private media managing to be viable in Ukraine now?
Well, first of all, I would want to comment a bit on the disinformation thing, which is a huge thing, but it's also like a very huge philosophical question going back to, should we restrict the internet or not? I think not. But I think that the role of the journalist is to basically be better, bigger, and more popular and more creative than those creating the disinformation. So that's the strategy we take. We go on all the social media platforms we can lay our hands on, essentially. First of all, to prevent the fake Kiev Independent accounts from popping up there, and that's happening all the time. So whenever the new platform is set up, like Threads, for example, then weekly somebody is like, "Are you guys on Threads? I subscribe." We're like, "No, not yet," but there's already a fake Kiev Independent account. So we need to be everywhere, and we need to be bigger and more popular and more creative and invest more resources and be more thoughtful of what we post than anyone who creates this information. And we've spent a lot of time trying to adapt to different platforms, to sound native for them, to make sure that we gain popularity in the native for the platform way, and that way we can actually compete with the sources of disinformation, which is an uphill battle, I have to say. But I don't think that we can debunk all the fakes created out there. And the only thing we can do is just be there presenting with the alternative fact-checked information. As for how we're doing, basically we were set up 3 months before the invasion, as everyone already mentioned, me included. We had nothing. We had no funding, no institution, nothing. And our business model, the idea was to basically live off the advertising, because that's advertising was big for the Kiev Post. We knew that, sort of sustainable, not like super big, but still. And we started working with the advertisers. And in the first 3 months, while still having very small readership, I think our readership in the first couple months was around 50,000 page views. We actually managed to sell quite a lot of ads and make some money. But then on February 22, or February 24 in 2022, the market just died overnight. We expected it to start reviving in 23, but it didn't happen. So Ukrainian advertising market is pretty much deadish. That doesn't help. But we also knew one other thing, that we can't be relying on just one source of funding. So, and we knew we had to diversify. So we also set up all the crowdfunding platforms to ask our readers for help and support. And we did get a response. We did get a few hundred of early supporters before the full-scale invasion, but also after the Russia invaded Ukraine, then the support grew exponentially, and a lot of people across the world supported us. I have to say that wasn't just a, lucky chance, as many try to say that, the Kyiv Independent was just set up in a good time to, that wasn't it. We did a lot of work to promote the membership that we're based on, to maintain the engaged community. That is a lot of work, I have to say. And we do it by this time. So we struggle with a lot of things. We talk to a lot of colleagues across the whole world to try and figure out what are the tactics in maintaining the engaged community, and how we can gain more members, and how we can engage them in different parts of the company development and all that stuff. Now the Kyiv Independent is mostly funded by its readers through the membership program, but also through one-time donations. And over the last 2 years, over 50,000 people across the world supported us with their money in one or other way. And we have 10,000 monthly paying members, which is a huge support for us. But the main value they bring is not even the money, it's the connection they make for us. They are what makes us the bridge between Ukraine and the world, because we know how, through them, we know how Ukraine is seen. And through them, we can tackle these issues and, mitigate the risks and talk to the foreign audiences in a way they would understand, that helps us shape our reporting and, a lot of other things. So that is the main business model, but we also, of course, syndicate content, and we try to diversify as much as possible. So we are interpublishing. We're still trying to do some commercial sales, which is a struggle. But we believe that maintaining a good brand with advertisers is important. The other problem is that the situation is much more dire for a lot of other Ukrainian media. Because our audiences didn't lose their incomes, didn't lose their jobs. Our audiences will just basically refocus their charity efforts to Ukraine, while the audiences in Ukraine have a lot of other things to donate to the media, right? And a lot of media also in Ukraine don't feel that they have the right to ask for donations from their readers, and that's also a whole other problem. And that's the death of advertising market that is affecting a lot of media way more than it does affect the Kyiv Independent, even though we do suffer from it as well. But that raises the whole other question that leads us right to donor funding. So a lot of international donors came to support Ukrainian media, but at the same time, a lot of international donors focus on programmatic support that leads a lot of smaller media into the trap of not being able to serve their audiences. Because what they do when they struggle for any funding to pay any salaries to their staff, they basically collect this bunch of grants, which is like 10 stories about LGBTQ rights, 5 stories about, women on the front line, 3 stories about, I don't know, successful police officers and something, right? And then they have all this funding and all these obligations to write the stories, and then no staff to actually research what their audiences actually need. And that is a trap a lot of local and hyper-local media are in. Well, the other problem of the donor funding is that it's very focused on saving the dying, while it's not very focused on helping those who can grow and capture the opportunity. And that leaves the market quite distorted, with a lot of media that are, kind of zombie projects a little bit, that are, sort of have this puzzle of writing all these different stories, not clear what community they're serving and what audiences they're serving, but they're still there. And then the other media who actually are in good touch with their audiences and not able to grow because they're, financial sustainability opportunities are limited and donors are not helping them grow, because that's not the goal. There are a lot of issues about that.
Thank you for sharing those insights about the challenges for independent media. I know Tarasa talked a little bit about the public broadcasting platform. Suspilne is Ukraine's major public broadcasting outlet, but I know Marta also has been working with another public broadcaster in Ukraine, Hromadske. Maybe you could share with us a little bit about what you're hearing as far as their challenges and their special role at this time.
Thank you. If I could speak about both. I've been cooperating with Hromadske Radio pretty much since they started, because Kyiv Independent, I love you guys, but Hromadske Radio, they were around at a time when censorship was a real problem. And they started like you guys, they had no money. They just wanted to get accurate news out there. And they're celebrating their 10th anniversary this year. And I love these small independent media outlets because they don't have the pressures of an owner who dictates editorial policy. And they are able to present the news and information that they feel society needs. The challenges, as Daryna has just articulated, is how do you financially sustain yourself when you are a small independent media outlet? And that is a big challenge, and I'll speak to that in a second, but Ukraine's public broadcaster is one of the really good news stories coming out of this war. I'm not sure if the audience knows, Ukraine's public broadcaster was created only in 2014. Until 2014, the Ukrainian state was refusing to allow, they kept part of the media infrastructure from the Soviet period in state hands. So it was still state owned. And it was only after
2017, Marta, 17.
The process started in 2014. And then in 2017, it actually became, but the law was
adopted 14, but
the law was adopted in
17.
2014, and then it took a while to get, but thank you for that, to get everything set up. But with the escalated war and the increase in digital programming, Suspilne's profile, this is the public broadcaster, their profile is raising in a way that makes me very, very happy, because it didn't used to be very popular. And now it is actually being recognized as a very good media source. So that I think they have the access to plug into those international public broadcasting networks, which small independent outlets like Hromadske Radio and Kyiv Independent really need to struggle to get those grants and get that support. And they've been doing well, but this is sort of jumping ahead to your question about what foundations could do. So I don't know if I could just speak to that now, or if you want me to hold off with that.
Go ahead, go for it.
Well, this is picking up a little bit on what Daryna was saying. I think the desire to support independent media in Ukraine and other parts of the world by foundations is wonderful. But my very strong recommendation is foundations should be listening to what the media outlets need rather than trying to impose their own agenda. Because I've heard this over and over, and I've just heard it again. We want you to be writing articles about this and this and this and that. Well, that's not the correct approach. The correct approach is, what are the main issues on the ground in your country, and how can we support you presenting information in an objective and appealing way that will have an impact on public opinion, public policy, and democracy, rather than imposing the agenda. So that's something that I would, this is to any foundations who are listening or interested, that the aid is very important, but it needs to be bottom up, not top down.
Great, thank you, Marta, for that very important insights on the issue of helping media and the public broadcasting situation. I wanted to touch briefly on the issue of education of journalists and training. It seems to me that Ukraine has quite a good number of universities with good journalism programs. I've had the privilege of teaching at a few of those myself as a Fulbrighter. So yeah, it's just a fantastic enthusiasm among the students and lecturers. So that's something that I think our funders, our participants should be aware of. And also there's a lot of training going on now in Ukraine that I've noticed from places like the Suspilnyst Foundation and Taras Patriu's group, training of skills in war reporting, in terms of mental health of journalists, that type of thing. So I just wanted to mention that. I don't know if any of you particularly wanted to comment on any of those issues.
I would be happy to comment. I worked in media education for the media professionals, the postgraduate, of course, for a while, and also had, some experience teaching for the university course. But one thing I probably wouldn't just yet agree with is that we have quite a lot of the good educational programs for journalists. Unfortunately, not. There are two that I know of that actually produce skilled media professionals. One is Kyiv Mohyla School of Journalism, and another one is UKU, Ukrainian Catholic University School of Journalism. Unfortunately, the state university J schools are mostly very outdated, and the people we get from there have to be taught from the ground zero. And it's not often, they don't often engage practitioners into teaching, unfortunately. But I think there are a lot of enthusiasms happening there right now, and I think people start to change the approach, even though it's pretty hard. It's a kind of a big bureaucratic machine on this in the state education system. As a person hiring journalists for like the last 10 years, I have to say it's been difficult. There is a lack of talent, there is a lack of experience in the market. It's very hard to find editors, especially for the Kyiv Independent. It's like close to impossible, because we need quite a specific combination of skills that shouldn't be that unique on the market as they are now. But that said, there are a lot of educational programs for the media professionals, and there are a lot of foundations who are doing an excellent job there. So except for Suspilnyst, there is also Media Development Foundation. There is International Press Institute. There are programs here. There is a few other NGOs in Ukraine that are doing educational programs for as long as I remember. And many of them are also getting on the business side of journalism. That is also very important to me, because for a long time it was deemed that any journalist can be a media manager. Well, it's not true. It's a different skill. So the trap we fell into is basically having a lot of big newsrooms and like one person on the business side supposed to sustain that huge newsroom. So I think the trend is changing now, and there are a lot of media management programs now teaching people how to fundraise, how to create a business plan, how to monetize different types of content. And that is a huge success, I think. It's not yet in the state education programs, or very partially at least, but it is a trend that I'm very happy about. And I think another trend that I see is that a lot of media publications now take on the responsibility to teach the next generation themselves. The Kyiv Independent is actually launching the J School to teach Ukrainian journalists to report for foreign audiences, because we believe that better Ukrainian journalists report for foreign audiences, not the foreign ones. I can talk about that later if you want, but that is the initiative we took on. I also know that Ukrainska Pravda is probably launching a school, and a few other publications are trying to teach the next generation of people who will be working in media now, not leaving that to media NGOs, not leaving that to international donors. And that is a great trend.
Great, thank you, Daryna. So I'm not seeing any questions in the chat, but there's still time if you'd like to type in a question there. We can still get to that, but as we kind of wrap up our conversation, I wanted to focus again on kind of opportunities for funders in Ukraine in the media sphere. I'd like each of you to kind of share your thoughts about what funders can look at, and especially thinking in terms of meeting the needs now and meeting the needs as Ukraine rebuilds after the war. There'll probably be a lot of new challenges, a lot of help that will be needed to help society get through the challenges of rebuilding after the war and the trauma of the war and all that. I know Internews, IREX, USAID are some of the big players on the scene, but perhaps there a role for other funders in new areas that we haven't mentioned or talked about. All these issues of funding documentaries, investigative journalism, media management, a lot of things. Taras, would you like to perhaps start us off on that? You're muted.
Yes, I see we also have some question in chat already. As to the support, I'd like to highlight one of the first priorities for right now is access to media and work of the media in the front line and bordering with Russia territories. We see now quite a number of problems there for the difficulty to get Ukrainian media. The Russia who is spreading on the airways, like the Russian television and radio that is penetrating through the border, and there are still some areas when people can mostly receive only Russian television and no Ukrainian television. And so in such areas also work of newspapers, even though they much lower with popularity, but they become more important also because newspapers are mostly for older people, and in front line in many cases when younger population they relocated to the center of the region or to center of Ukraine, while older people are still living there. So that's one of the big challenges that we have, and not many partners that we have working on that.
Great, thank you. I see we do have a question in the chat from Bill asking about how do Armed Forces of Ukraine frontline media specialists fit into the equation. And while we're at it, I see Nick, I believe you have a question as well, so I could take your question and then let our panelists respond.
Two at once, thank you. Thank you, I deeply appreciate everything I'm learning today. My question is, and you alluded to the dilemmas of local media, but how does one get to them? And because that's something that's in itself could be difficult to do from the outside, but it also, I think, leads to the question of the centralization of media. It's something that I think I know we struggle with in the United States too, of the support to local media outlets rather than the big ones that actually can penetrate into local markets. Maybe they don't always, but then there's the issue of how responsive are they to what people actually need in local communities or want to learn and know about. So that's my curiosity of how do you get to those places if one were to be able to support them?
I can start on that. Ukrainian media market is pretty viable, and there are a lot of great media projects, local and hyperlocal, and all of them are connected in one way or another to big media NGOs that are supporting them on a daily basis with expertise, training, small grants, whatever. All of the big media NGOs have their networks of local and hyperlocal media that are trustworthy and that are reliable, and you can access them and find them and find out about the ways to support them by getting in touch with the big media development NGOs that have been working with the local and hyperlocal journalists for decades now. and would have reliable information for you. And you want to suggest a profile of a media you want to support, you want to ask for a profile of a media that would need support the most in this period of time. But it's all shouldn't be very difficult, and I would be happy to provide the contacts and to put you in touch with people who can give you some advice on that.
Thank you. And anyone want to take the issue of frontline armed forces media?
It wasn't clear to me, is this like media that's targeting people who are on the front line, or how do people who are fighting access media? Wasn't sure if that was clear, because the people who are on the front line, I mean, this
Bill's
is
gonna tell us.
I'll frame the question. I have I know of media specialists that are part of the AFU.
Yes.
They're soldiers, but they're assigned the title of media specialists. So my question is, the work they're doing, the photography they're taking, the videos they're capturing, the information they're capturing, how is it getting into the mainstream flow? Because my understanding is based on some comments that it's tough to get the information out and get it out properly and get the truth out. And so that's my question. How is the country sort of making sure that these media specialists and the work they're doing is getting put out into the world?
Yeah, but
well, I think Taras can speak to that because he's the ministry, but my guess is, if they're working as photographers for the armed forces of Ukraine, the armed forces then take those photographs and transmit them to the ministries and put the stuff out there. That's where we're getting those images, is from those guys. They're like the embedded reporters, except they are actually fighting. That's my understanding. But Taras, you probably know.
Let's speak frankly. There is a problem with that. Ideally, there are journalists who work for Army Inform as a state information agency affiliated with Ministry of Defense. And ideally, they get these photos and disseminate very fast and very nice photos. They, of course, are very much trying not to get any negative consequences, because for Army, the protecting of soldiers, the protecting of information is of much bigger interest than disseminating. So it takes time. Then it's rather journalists, international Ukrainians, who are trying to get on the front line to get on those places where there is important data. We last week received just a statement, another statement why the problem is really there. We received a big evaluation by the European Union of how Ukraine is ready for the next stage of negotiations with the EU. In the part that is responding of media, we have 3 obligations stated as the actions that Ukraine needs to take in the next year. One of these 3 is stated, it's not a direct quotation, but that's we need to, the government together with media organization should work about better rules to provide access to journalists to the front line, keeping in mind the security issues. So this is also one of the statements that European Union highlighted in the report.
And if I can add to that, unfortunately now very often the access to the front line or the frontline reporting accreditation is used as a tool to influence journalism reporting. And if the authorities don't particularly like something, you report on, the next thing you know is they take away your accreditation. And without the accreditation, you can't do a lot as a frontline reporter. So that definitely has to improve. But I think what the question was about is that, like if the special media specialist is working for the army, they're basically working for the state. And I don't think they can truly expect to, same rules be applied to them as to independent reporters, because their material is mostly using for, what state wants to report on and how state wants to report on it. And that's just it. I don't think they should be delusional about, that it's independent reporting or actually like journalistic work. It's more like propaganda work, which is also important. because I mean, from these photos and from these reports, many independent journalists also take the information from the places we don't have access to and couldn't possibly have access to. But at the same time, I think they should be realistic.
We have about 2-3 minutes left, and I wanted to touch upon the topic of oligarch-owned media. It seemed that problem has somewhat dissipated with the war for various reasons, but going forward as Ukraine rebuilds and integrates with the European Union and that type of thing, are there concerns that do any of the panelists have concerns about that issue rearing its ugly head again?
I'm just going to jump in here. Ukraine's media landscape has transformed radically as a result of this war, and the transformation will continue. There will be less media, there will be less oligarchic media. And I think that we can look at this both positive and negative. I think that both opens up space for public broadcasting and quality independent outlets like Kyiv Independent, Hromadske Radio, but it also raises the danger that people will be looking to social media and entertainment rather than real news. So I think there's two sides to this story.
I would add that even though I agree the trend is very positive, the Ukrainian media market is very strong on the digital media side. At the same time, most of the TV stations belong to the oligarch and still do. And now what prevents oligarchs from, putting through their agenda, even though not really prevents, is the marathon, which is a superficial instrument to hold that off. Once it's off, the oligarchs are back on track. And unfortunately, Suspilne is very much underfunded to compete with, TV product to TV product with the oligarch-owned TV channel. If you just looked at the quality of the TV product, you can see that. And until Suspilne is funded enough to compete, that risk never goes away. The good thing is, though, that TV consumption is going down. So more and more people will consume news from digital, and that's a good thing for us, because Ukrainian digital media scene is much better than TV.
But also we have a minute left.
Yes.
Concluding remarks.
Yes. So as the media landscape, I absolutely agree that television going down. It's only 30% of viewership. 70% is not television. The primary source of news, Telegram channels, which are absolutely diverse. So I don't think that Telethon is creating the monopoly, because it's really it's less than 30%, because not every television viewers is watching. And as to oligarchs are very, very rich people who use media to influence political life. And I think it's much, much less now. And those who were originally considered as oligarchs, I don't see if they are really using, they're having troubles. It's maybe one existing politician who is very, very rich with several TV channels, who is still using these TV channels for the political promotion. I wouldn't give names. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Taras, Daryna, Marta. Thanks to our audience. And I think we had a very interesting and thorough discussion today about how funders can support Ukrainian media, and overall got a very thorough picture about the media landscape in Ukraine. And now I'll just turn it back over to Melissa and Natalie for any final remarks. Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us. Just a second thank you for being here, and appreciation for our continued partnership on this issue. And there'll be a recording and summary up on the event page soon, and that'll also be available to those who couldn't join us live. So thanks you all, and have a wonderful rest of your week.